Hello, in this demonstration I will be showing you a method for mixing plaster. In this bowl I have just fine casting plaster that I got from my local supplier. If you're not quite familiar with this kind of industrial material, it is always best to check the safety data sheet which the supplier should be able to show you. There are safety implications, and I will always advise, if you're using dusty materials, is to use a P2 dust mask. When it's mixed, you don't want to have it splashing. If it happens to splash into your face, and particularly your eyes, it might be advisable to wear a pair of safety goggles. And if your skin is a bit sensitive, then nitrile gloves are, well, I think essential. Right, so I'm going to move that to one side, and I'm going to mix the plaster and cast it into this plastic tray. And the plastic tray is really good. It's a nice resisting material for the plaster, but it still will need a release agent. So I've got an industrial release agent which is called mirror glaze, and it is just a wax. It smells very nice, but it's not very, it is a bit nasty, so you need to clean your hands afterwards. So I'm using a liberal amount of wax. I'm getting into all the nooks and crannies, because if you looked at the plastic under a microscope, it would look like the surface of the moon. There'll be craters and scratches in it. So you want to fill up, that's one side, you want to fill up all these imperfections in the plastic surface with the wax. Now once you've got the wax on there, you can't leave it on there, you need to polish it out. So just polish this out. If you leave the wax on the surface, it will probably taint the plaster cast at the end. So you need to polish it all out so you get a nice clean surface. Now I've got a prepared bowl of water here, but the bowls do get hammered. I've been using this one for years, and as you can see, it starts to get scratched and tainted. So I have been known to actually put mirror glaze around the bowl as well. This makes cleaning the bowl at the end of the day much easier, and it does preserve it a bit better. And you don't want a previous mix going into the new mix. Put that to one side. Take that out of the way. Now I'm going to put in the water a bit of pigment. So in other words, the plaster will have a colour. Now that's quite useful, especially if you're doing plaster relief moulds. It may be that you need a primer colour, or you need to show each set that you do. Now this is supplied by Cornelison's in London, and I'm going to use just a small amount. A little bit goes a long way. I keep it in plastic containers. The bags are very strong, but as you can see, it goes everywhere, and the dust, so you don't want the dust going everywhere, and most importantly, it keeps it nice and dry. So a plastic container is really good. Now I purchased the plaster from a local supplier, and I usually buy it in a 2 kilogram bag. The problem with buying it in a large bag, once you've cut the bag open, the plaster strength will start to deteriorate. So And so what I do is, as soon as I get the bag, I put it into a very, very big plastic container that has a sealed lid. You can buy plaster in 10 kilogram buckets with a sealed lid, and in my opinion that's a really good idea. And if you're just starting out in this, that's what I would do. Then the plaster will last a very long time. Once the bag's open, it deteriorates virtually in weeks. So we've got our pigment in the water, and what I'm going to do now is just gently drop the plaster into the water. Now, I'm not going to measure this or weigh it or do complicated mathematics. This is the method that Rodin used. You're literally putting the powder into the water, just very gently, and what happens is the water is moving towards the water is being consumed by the powder, and the powder is dropping to the bottom of the bowl. So the idea is to consume all the water before you even start thinking about mixing. That way you know exactly the amount of plaster you put in, and it will be the correct mix. If you were working on a construction site and you were putting in cornicing, you wouldn't have time to mess about with weighing machines and that sort of thing. It's done this method. Now, as you can see, the water is slowly being consumed by the powder. I'm not rushing, as I don't want to create too many bubbles. I'm not going to use a mechanical means or whisk this up. This is not, we're not making a cake, or, we're mixing plaster, so the bubbles are the enemy, really. Now, if you want to know what plaster is, it's a gypsum stone, which is mined and then calcified, so when you add the water to it, it's trying to go back to what it was, a mineralite or a stone. And I believe that Paris, France, the whole city is built on a seam of gypsum and limestone, and that's why you get plaster of Paris. Now, there's a crust starting. I've got no great mountain in it. I'm just slowly covering the water with some plaster, so I get this kind of crusty surface. Okay, that's done. I'll bring back the mould, put that to one side. Now, you could put your hand in there, but if there's pigment in there, and if you're not wearing rubber gloves, the pigment can be quite strong. So I'm just gently stirring this in. I'm just folding it or stirring it. I'm not whisking it. You can see some of the bubbles coming to the surface. I'm not rushing this. This looks really good. So you know it's right, because if you did that, you can see it's thickening up on the spatula. So right, this is about ready now to put into the mould. So I use stainless steel tools. This is called a small tool. I have got steel ones, but they clag up very quickly, and stainless steel it stays clean, and it's really nice to use. And okay, I'm not rushing, as you can see. Now if you wanted to clean your tools and clean your hands, it's always wise to have a bucket of water. Now you can have a brush and just wipe them off. And use a bit of paper towel. So it's always good to keep your tools nice and clean. Okay, we'll bring back the tray. Now I'm going to just drop this into the surface of the mould, and I'm going to push it in or scour it into the surface. So if this was very textured, you don't want any bubbles on the surface. So by scouring it in and not tipping it in for the first set, you can guarantee that you're going to get rid of most of the bubbles. So I'm working this round the mould. I'm still taking my time. That's really good. Now I'm going to just vibrate the mould, and the bubbles will now come hopefully to the surface. Water is a great way of leveling things. Now that is a first set. That's about 3 millimeters thick. Just going to wash my hands off. So that's about 3 millimeters thick. So if you want to now, I would have probably left that probably a few more minutes, but for the demonstration I'm going to show you how to use reinforcing. So this is just cotton scrim. So I'm just going to drop that into the surface. If you do it too quickly and it will just drop right down, and then you'll end up seeing reinforcing rather than the plaster surface. Good. One more. Now you could use quad axle, which is a fiberglass, and that works really well, especially on shaped moulds. This is quite good because it's just flat. Right, I'm just going to wash my hands again. Now we've got some plaster left, so if you wanted to, you could now smooth out the back using tools, or just pour in the last amount. You don't need very much troweling because it's actually by vibrating it, it's made it flat anyway. Right, so what will happen now is I'm going to put that to one side up there. So that will just take probably about 30 minutes to go to sort of go tacky. And what we're trying to look for is what they call exothermic. In other words, that this will start to warm up. If it doesn't warm up, then you know that you've got too much water in the mix. So this is why it's quite crucial to consume all the water, and then you know that majority of the mix is actually plaster. So I'll put that to one side. The exothermic will take about half an hour to an hour, depending on how thick the mould is. So now we've got the bowl here, so how do we clean all this up? Well, you can't tip that down the sink, so you've got to find a way of getting rid of it. So one way would be to simply wash the bowl out using a brush until it's clean. Now if you've got a lot of bowls, it may be that you just leave it in the bowl, and that's fine. So when it's completely set, and hopefully it will come out, and that's a good mix because it's all nice and it crunches nicely. It's a nice good mix that. Now, so what do you do with this? Well, you can't put that in the rubbish. So what you need to do is, as what I do, is get a plastic bag and put it in a plastic bag or sack, and then take that up to a waste disposal, a place where they can then deal with it, because a lot of these places now, recycling centres, will have a plaster bin where all the plaster will go, and then it's not mixed with general household waste. Okay, so I'm now going to leave that. I'm going to pause the film and we'll come back in a couple of hours and see if it will come out. Several hours have now passed, and the process of exothermic has taken place. So the plaster has heated up and is now gone cool. So once it's heated up and gone cool, you know that the process of setting has taken place. So what I'm going to do is, this is the conclusion of this demonstration, but I'll just sort of tie up a couple of loose things that I thought might be a good tip for you. I'll put it to one side. Now the bucket we used to wash our hands in, what happened, you can probably quite see this in the video, is that the plaster drops to the surface, drops from the surface down to the bottom of the bucket. So I would try and reuse that water, not for mixing plaster, but actually to reuse for washing your hands and equipment. So you're continually reusing the same amount of water. So I would just draw that off until you get to the bottom of the bucket. Now at the bottom of the bucket will end up with a kind of sludgy crust. I would then put that back into the, so scrape the sludge out of the bucket, put it into the bag, and then you take that to the recycling centre and put it in their plaster skip. Right. Cleaning tools, I just cannot stand having plaster all over handles and things, and if the surface of these tools are all clagged up, and in fact with this one's stainless steel and this one's steel, the steel will rust really quickly. So the best way I've found to clean steel tools particularly is to use wet and dry. So this is a wet and dry piece of paper, and it's designed to go in water, and it's a very, very fine paper, so you can then get it really quite clean and almost polished, which I like. Now that works with the aluminium as well. With a handle you just have to use another method, because you don't want to use wet and dry sandpaper on a plastic handle. Now, looking at the wet and dry, you probably want to know what's a fine paper and what's a coarse paper. Well, the number on the back of the paper, higher the number means finer the surface. So if you had a number which was P120, the surface would be, it's a very coarse grit. I'll move that to one side. Right, so we're finishing off now. Let's move that out of the way. So who used plaster? So I've got a picture here of Edward Palozzi, Elizabeth Frink, Barbara Hepworth. Let's move that there so you can see what it's like. Barbara Hepworth, these are sculptures she's done in plaster. The Tate has Tate St Ives, and you can still go and see her studio in St Ives. For somebody who's doing research into Barbara Hepworth, there's an amazing resource there, and you can actually see her studio. She lived there for about 20-25 years. There's also a permanent exhibition of Barbara Hepworth's work at Wakefield. It's a purpose-built museum gallery. It's superb. So if you're doing research on Barbara Hepworth, that's the place to go. Also, Rachel Whiteread. This book shows the picture of her ghost books, which I think she did for the Venice Biennale. So she made a rigid box, put the books in, and then cast the negative image of it, and then took the books out, and you can still see there's a residue of the books. So the plaster has actually drawn out some colour from the old book she used. Her most famous work, and it's not probably, I don't know if the camera can zoom into this, but this picture here is her most famous work. I believe the Tate's got it. It's called Ghost. It was done in 1990, and she literally entombed herself in a Victorian room, and so she's taken a cast of the room, and she did it inside the room, so she literally entombed herself. So she used plaster to construct this amazing well, I can only say a negative of the building. Okay, so that leaves just the last few bits. Let's have a look to see if this came out. Move that out of the way. Now this is a rigid mould. If it was a rubber mould, it probably might be easy to get out. And this is a one-take video, so anything can happen, and I do fluff my lines occasionally. So with a rigid mould, I think the best way is to try and prise this open and just go for it and see what happens. So if it breaks, it breaks. It's going to pop out. Yes, great. Well, that's pretty good. I'm very pleased with that. It's actually taken up some of the scratches on the marks of the the plastic tray. It's a big scratch there, and it's on there. There's a scratch across it, which is from the plastic. It's dry. It's gone really hard. It's a good cast. It's a very tight finish. It's almost shiny. It's a really tight cast. I'm very pleased with that. It's quite a nice colour, and that sort of almost moves on to another demonstration, which is Cagiola, putting pigment in plaster, for another time. I hope there's something in this video, the demonstration. I hope there's some takeaways for you. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time.